They told her to be grateful for what she had. They told her to keep the house tidy, smile when company came, and accept every slight as a small price for belonging. They did not count on the moment she stopped smiling. Lin Wei learned the rules one by one in a quiet, measured voice that never rose to anger. From the first night at the Chen household, when she accepted a cup of bitter tea and a curt nod instead of a welcome, she catalogued indignities as if keeping receipts. The matriarch, the woman who ran the family like a ledger, where every expression of affection had to be approved in advance, kept the house under a strict economy of attention. Money was a weapon disguised as frugality. Respect was rationed to favored relatives. Chen Hao, earnest and soft around the edges, loved her in small, distracted ways. His love was there, but always negotiated with his mother's proximity, always mediated by an anxious fear of crossfire. Small things accumulated until they had momentum. A dinner when the in-laws turned their elbows toward Lin Wei's plate with the precision of people who measure people by servings, a birthday whose cake candle was snuffed as if to mute her presence. Su Qing, who arrived at the house one afternoon with a basket of pastries and a smile that had been practiced in a mirror, learned fast how to be two things at once. Tender confidant to Chen Hao's mother and a strategic friend to Chen Hao himself, she wore kindness like a costume. Lin Wei saw the way Su Qing's eyes watched the household like a chess player, softer in appearance but calculating. The breaking point was small and absurd in its symbolism, a pearl necklace that meant nothing to anyone except as proof of her supposed clumsiness. It belonged to Chen Hao's aunt, a cheap but treasured heirloom worn twice a year at weddings and funerals. Lin Wei had admired it once, caught herself, and said nothing. Near the sink, while making tea, she bent to retrieve a dropped sugar packet, and the chain slipped and fell between the cabinet and the trash. It took 2 hours for the household to discover it missing. The matriarch arrived like a winter storm, voice cool, accusations practiced. The necklace was missing, and the trajectory of blame was simple in a house where suspicion preferred the newest addition. "You were careless," Chen Hao's mother said, the sentence a gavel. "You should be more careful. You have no idea how things carry value." Lin Wei's protest, measured, came out like thread. "I would never." "She was the last one near it," Su Qing said softly, folding hands in the way of someone rehearsed. Her smile was funeral bright, a maid's furtive glance, a smudged spot on a sleeve. Someone suggested checking the trash, the kind of admonition that felt like a hunt. They pulled the bag from the kitchen and all of them watched as a hand in a thin glove threaded through soggy napkins, until there it was, the pearls, glossy and damp, as if guilty. A chorus of small, accusing noises rose. Chen Hao's mother kept her voice clipped. "Careless people break things. Careless people should know their place." Lin Wei wanted to kneel and clean, to be contrite, but she had not lost the necklace. The sight of those pearls ruined in someone's idea of justice made something inside her harden. Her cheeks burned with shame not from the finding, but from the performance of finding. She felt the household narrow around her until every breath was policed. Chen Hao stood between them like a fence, his face wet with conflict. He reached for her hand then, an apology in the gesture. But the matriarch's eyes found him, and he withdrew as if burned. The scene at the tea table got filmed by a neighbor's smartphone. Someone always brought gossip like a flower, and the video leapt thinly across messaging apps that titled Lin Wei careless, greedy, unfit. The household's humiliation became a spectacle. The next day, strangers offered her concern in the shape of messages. The matriarch pinned the stain of suspicion on her like a brooch, small and unmistakable. Pressure translated into rules. The matriarch issued decrees about money: limit the baby's crib, avoid an expensive postnatal center, skip the trendy vitamins touted by guided accounts. They argued not once but repeatedly about how expenses for a woman's recovery were indulgences. "We are a sensible family," the matriarch would say. "We don't squander. If she becomes arrogant with demands, we will be the ones paying the price." When Lin Wei was 7 months along, she found herself hemmed in by prescriptions from strangers and the constant hum of gossip. Su Qing's visits increased, always arriving with a thermos and a soft gaze, always positioning herself near the matriarch so her words landed like a second echo. For the baby's health, certain practices are better. Old remedies, the kind my aunt recommended, they have helped in our family for generations. The matriarch nodded. Tradition became a lever, care became coercion. The most dangerous day was quiet at first. The house smelled of boiled herbs and rice congee, the kind of domestic odor that belonged to a family who understood cure as ritual. The matriarch insisted Lin Wei take a medicinal bath her aunt used for generations to ensure an easy delivery. The phrase carried the weight of ancestral certainty and social pressure. To refuse it would be to declare oneself in rebellion, not only against the matriarch, but against the entire idea of communal salvation. Lin Wei hesitated. The idea of being bathed by steam and pungent herbs, of sitting soaked in water tended by women who whispered prayers, did not sound like medicine. It sounded like a trap, ancient laundry disguised as care. She remembered the way Su Qing's fingers had rested on her shoulder the night before, the soft pressure of insistence. She imagined the matriarch smiling as she watched. "No," she said, which was the first word that had weight in the house. Her voice trembled, but it landed. "I'd like to follow the doctor's advice." There was a silence like a held breath. Su Qing's expression flashed. "Oh, Wei, the doctor recommends rest. Yes, but this bath has soothed more women than any pill. It's simple, nothing dangerous. Your mother-in-law arranged it out of love." Chen Hao looked weary. He wanted a middle ground, always the diplomat. "Maybe just this once," he pleaded, trying to stitch peace between his mother's expectations and his wife's fear. Lin Wei saw the safety slip away like a tide. The words inside her, "No, the doctor, I need to be careful," stacked themselves like stones. She thought of her unborn child, and of the hospital leaflet that had told her to avoid unverified remedies. But when she looked at Chen Hao, she saw behind his eyes the old grocer's instincts taught by his mother. Deference equals survival in that family. He wanted to be a bridge, but the bridge was collapsing. The pressure of constant belittlement had taught him to avoid hard edges. Love in his hands came as compromise. She did not argue. She acquiesced to keep the house from fracturing in public. That night, steam rose in a blue tiled bathroom. Su Qing, aunties, and the matriarch whispered around Lin Wei, while petals and herbs soaked into the warm water. They spoke gentle rituals as if smothering her with care. She let them tend her because rebellion cost too much. She let them baptize her into their definition of a good daughter-in-law. Later she woke not with the promised calm of an easy labor, but with a buoyant nausea that doubled into pain. The herbs were hot on her skin. The world tilted. People rushed. Voices became frantic. The matriarch's orders clipped like knives. Someone called Chen Hao, and she heard the fear in his voice as if from far away. Then the slippery slide of consciousness. Her last clear image was of Su Qing's face, bright with concern or calculation. She could no longer tell. The hospital lights were too white. Machines beeped with the mechanical patience of strangers. For a while she existed in small snapshots. A surgeon's hands, the smell of antiseptic. Chen Hao's face carved with anxiety as he gripped the hospital bed rail. She heard the word, emergency C-section, and understood then how near the edge she had come. In the operating theater, she was simultaneously present and outside her body, a watcher of herself being sewn and carried forward. When the child came, the cry cracked the room like a public verdict. A woman's voice announced weight and color. A nurse wrapped the infant and held her above the sheet. Lin Wei's chest stung so fiercely she could not decide whether to weep. She wanted to reach, to touch the small, wrinkled hand, but the space between them held a world of wires and protocols. In the ICU, days were measured by the beep of monitors and the number on the charge sheet. The matriarch hovered like a shadow at the foot of her bed. She did not visit like a grandmother. She interviewed like an accountant. "How much will the bill be?" she asked the nurse as if the question answered itself. "We will have to economize." Lin Wei tried to speak about her aching body, about pain, and about the way her child's fingers curled like knots. The matriarch's hand smoothed over a form, and the numbers shouted guilt. "Make do," she said. "We will be sensible. You will not run us into debt for indulgence." Chen Hao floated between duty to his mother and guilt for leaving Lin Wei unattended in a sea of suspicion. He loved her and had his own failures. Small silences, missed glances, a lifetime of ill-equipped kindness. He wrote a note on the hospital bed's clipboard. "I'll sort this," and carried paperwork away to argue with family administrators who called medical expense an extravagance. Into that fragile, fluorescent world stepped Gu Yancheng. He had been in Lin Wei's life long before conquest and decorum. Boyhood memories of running through rain-slick alleyways to split candies, of a pocketed hand that taught her to climb a rusted fence to watch fireworks. He and Lin Wei had been friends who knew each other's small, embarrassed secrets, not lovers then, but the kind of childhood companion who preserves a person's first laugh like a talisman. Years had placed distance between them, careers, cities, but he had never been far from the outline of her life. When he arrived at the hospital, the door opened on a different temperature of attention. Gu did not rush in with headline proclamations. He carried himself with practical calm and an efficient wave of decisions that made people around him feel less frayed. He had been, the hospital receptionist learned in 2 minutes, a person accustomed to fast solutions. He asked for the bill, not with the clumsy discomfort of Chen Hao, but with the confidence of someone used to paying for problems and not letting them fester. He offered to cover the deposit then and there, and when the matriarch stiffened as if affronted by charity, Gu placed his card with a patient gentleness. "Please let her focus on recovery," he said. "Everything else can be arranged." To the matriarch, his money was an intrusion into the household's debates. To Lin Wei, it was oxygen. He booked a private room so she could sleep without the constant parade of relatives and the thin, tormenting consolation of their stare. He insisted she keep the child in the room for bonding, rejecting the family's notion that this infant's needs were a ledger. He moved like a steady current under the surface of their crisis, paying what needed to be paid, arranging for nurses who spoke to Lin Wei like a person instead of a problem. Chen Hao watched him with complicated gratitude. He had known Gu since childhood. The two men had been running buddies who once shared a bench and a comic book. Gu's presence at the hospital felt like an accusation and a solace at once. Chen Hao's pride stung. This other man could offer what he could not, and the matriarch bristled at the implication. "We don't need charity," she said once, to which Gu replied without condescension that the help was friendship, not alms. While Lin Wei slept in curtained light, Gu sorted out formalities. When he learned the family had been trying to keep her recovery costs low by threatening to send the infant to a distant aunt if they could not afford reasonable care, he intervened with a quiet force. "You will not separate a mother and child because of accounting," he told the matriarch. He signed forms if the matriarch would not, spoke to the hospital about the visiting list, and in a conversation with an insurance liaison, revealed his connections with a foundation that expedited paperwork. The hospital no longer saw a frail new mother disputed by her in-laws. It saw a secure patient, supported and shielded. Lin Wei woke alone one dim evening. The room tasted faintly of antiseptic and jasmine from the bouquet Gu had left. Her pulse calmed as she watched the infant sleep in an oval of soft blanket. The child's face was unfamiliar in the way all infants are, a map yet to be read. Lin Wei wanted both to cry and to hold steady. There was relief in having someone who simply did what needed to be done without announcing it as mercy. When she became more aware, she learned the details of what had happened in the rooms beyond her view. The matriarch's accusations, Su Qing's whispered insinuations to relatives, the neighbor's camera phone that had turned domestic tenderness into gossip. Chen Hao had argued with his mother in the hallway, voice cracked with the hard decisions that had never been his to make. The accusations against Lin Wei, carelessness, instability, being easily led, had been repurposed into justifications for control. They argued about sending the baby to a family member until the bills were settled. That phrase, "until the bills were settled," sounded like negotiation over a human heart. Gu sat with her for hours. He did not lecture. He reminded her of small kindnesses from their shared childhood, things that mattered because they proved continuity. The way she always folded a handkerchief twice, the sound of rain on a tin roof at night that used to make them both stay awake together. He brought coffee and a book, and when she faltered emotionally, he listened as if her words were precious and scarce. "You don't have to stay silent," he said once, the sentence simple and steady. "You are not cowardly for wanting to be safe. You can protect yourself and your child both. Protection for Lin Wei meant paperwork as much as it meant a vigil. The humiliation of the household had been public. The consequences could be legal and permanent. She had watched, misattributed as a clumsy, scandalized wife, while voices catalogued her missteps. She had sat in a hospital bed and felt the fragile border between private pain and public narrative. Her transformation did not arrive in an instant. It materialized in small, stubborn decisions. She insisted on a copy of her medical records. She asked for an itemized bill. She recorded a few conversations on her phone, partly out of fear that, in the house, what she said would be warped into confession. She asked Gu to contact an attorney she remembered from an old phone book while she was in recovery. Attorney Zhang, a woman who had once dealt with a dispute in a small neighboring town and who had a reputation for pursuing fair custody outcomes. When Gu came back, he handed Lin Wei a small neat card and a quiet assurance. "I'll introduce you." Chen Hao wanted to soothe things as he always tried to. Was it his nature or his training? By apologizing in slivers, offering to pay installments on hospital bills, promising new behaviors that never quite stuck. He loved her, yes, but his love operated under the assumption that repair could always be purchased with patience. The matriarch watched his attempts with weary calculation. She allowed him to visit more often but tightened the household rules the way someone tightens a drawstring when their profit margins shrink. One afternoon, when Lin Wei's nurse stepped out for 10 minutes and Gu sat in a corner sipping tea, the matriarch arrived with a thin stack of papers. Her eyes were flat. "We need to discuss the child's future," she said, as if the child were property to be inventoried. "You must understand how a family can protect its lineage." Lin Wei's answer was not dramatic. It was a careful, cool sentence that had cost her nights of sleep to assemble. "I want to provide a stable home for my child. I will not relinquish custody for financial insecurity. If the family intends to make decisions for the baby, then I will seek legal counsel." The matriarch's mouth tightened into the expression of someone who calculates losses. "You're exaggerating," she said. She glanced at Chen Hao, looking for the usual retreat, the small boy who would set aside his wife to keep the household peace. Chen Hao for once did not have the words to soothe both parties. He tried to bridge the storm by offering to speak to his mother, but in his own private moments, he was pained by lines he had not been able to cross. The matriarch accused him of weakness. The household accused Lin Wei of drama. Outside, gossip knitted a garment of distrust around her. When she was finally discharged, a small white hospital bracelet still on her wrist, Lin Wei stepped into a world that felt different. The matriarch had packed a small tote of necessary things, including a folded chintz blanket the family called tradition. Suqing kissed the baby's forehead with such sweetness, Lin Wei saw a blade. Chen Hao's hand went for hers in a gesture of conjugal normalcy, but this time Lin Wei did not accept the instinctive reconciliation. She had been cataloging injuries like a surgeon cataloging wounds, and in that inventory there was a cost to silence. At home, she moved like someone mapping a minefield. The necklace episode kept replaying in her mind. She watched footage friends had kept of her household. In the corner of one clip, she noticed Suqing's hand linger on the trash bag, watched as she angled conversation so that suspicion would point at Lin Wei. It was too deliberate to be accidental. She saved the video. She saved the nurse's testimony about the herbs. She saved receipts, the hospital's diagnostic report that listed the emergency procedure and the plausible cause. Acute distress after an external application. Small boxes of evidence accumulated like lanterns illuminating the path out of the dark. Attorney Zhang took the first intake in a narrow office that smelled of lemon oil and legal pads. She was brisk and blunt, the kind of professional whose kindness appeared as competence. "We'll need to file for custody and separation," she said. "You have a strong claim, medical records, witnesses, and evidence of coercion. We can request emergency custody to ensure the child remains with you while we mediate." Lin Wei felt her voice steady as she spoke. The first time she said the word divorce in front of someone who would translate it into legal action, it had the metallic clarity of a bell. She did not speak of revenge. She spoke of protection. For herself. For the child. For the right to make decisions about health care and dignity. Attorney Zhang drew up an initial retainer, and Lin Wei signed with a hand that had once trembled for fear. You'll have to decide on whether to seek joint custody or sole custody in the petition, Zhang advised. From what you've told me and from the records, arguing for primary custody and sole legal custody is defensible. You can ask for child support and medical expenses to be covered during the proceedings. We'll also request a temporary restraining order if you feel your safety is at risk. That last phrase felt alien and also necessary. Lin Wei thought of the matriarch's voice bargaining over the child's future. She thought of Su Qing's liquid smile. She thought of Chen Hao's hands, steady, but compromised. Sole legal custody, she said slowly, making a decision that would change the shape of her life. It was not born of vengeance, but of a sober recognition that the forces aligned against her would not shift alone. If the legal battery was one part of her strategy, evidence was the mortar. She handed Attorney Zhang the old hospital footage, the nurse's written statement, the recordings of the herb bath conversation. She signaled Chen Hao's wavering presence with a video of him retreating when an argument began, proof of a husband who loved yet flinched. She supplied the neighbor's video of the necklace being found in the trash, with Su Qing's near-deliberate posture. Attorney Zhang nodded and wrote down each detail. The decision to request a paternity test came out of careful calculation, not desperation. Su Qing had been whispering rumors, ridiculous, vicious stories meant to destabilize Lin Wei's claim to the child. Chen Hao's mother had flirted with the idea that a misplaced pregnancy or an imagined impropriety would make the lineage uncertain. In a household where rumor could become ownership, a clean, irrefutable document would be an antiseptic. The paternity test would be a means of documentation, of cutting rumor by proving biological fact. Gu helped arrange the test discreetly. He did it not as a knight to a damsel, but as a friend who understood the pragmatic power of certainty. Chen Hao hesitated when told of the plan. He wanted to tell Lin Wei that he would not allow their marriage to be transformed into courtroom exhibits, but the shadows of the matriarch's doubt and Su Qing's whispers had become a combustible mix. He agreed reluctantly. His name on a medical form felt like another threshold crossed. They collected samples at a clinic that smelled faintly of bleach. Lin Wei's hand shook as she signed the consent. The act of placing a tiny swab in a sterile tube felt intimate and surreal. When the clinic tech sealed the sample, Lin Wei felt a firm click inside herself. The test was an act of defense as much as it was a legal instrument. She imagined results like a tide that might turn public opinion. She imagined the matriarch's face when confronted with hard proof. Still, she did not expect the reaction that came from within the house. When Chen Hao returned that evening, the matriarch's displeasure had become a low, boiling pressure. "What is this for?" the matriarch demanded, as if the very idea of a test belittled family trust. "It's for clarity," Chen Hao said, voice too high with tension. "There are accusations. We need to put them to rest." The matriarch's eyes were cold as a coin. "You let outsiders turn your family into an exhibit. This is shameful." She said it like an accusation aimed to wound. Lin Wei felt the old familiar urge to explain herself away, to salvage civility with soft language. But the hospital bracelet itched beneath her sleeve like a reminder. She had come back from a place where her life had almost been taken, and if this was the world she had to reclaim her child in, she would do so with facts and forms. "You accuse what you do not know," she said quietly. "But I will not let rumors decide who raises my child." Chen Hao looked between them, caught in the weight of two households he had never reconciled. He loved his mother. That instinct had been trained into him like a habit. He loved Lin Wei too, in a way that was complicated and always partial. The love did not make him brave enough to choose. It made his silence heavy. After the clinic, Attorney Zhang filed the initial paperwork the next morning. A petition for dissolution of marriage and for sole legal custody with alternate living arrangements for the child to ensure stability while proceedings were pending. The papers were stamped, the signatures formal. Lin Wei felt the weight of the document as if it were a sword and a shield at once. She walked into the Chen household carrying an envelope that smelled of bureaucracy and resolve. The reaction was immediate. The matriarch's face closed like a door. Su Qing's smile had a crack in it, the kind of micro-expression that tells you the line of strategy has shifted. Chen Hao met Lin Wei by the landing and flinched when she extended the envelope. He took it with hands that trembled. "You're really doing this," he said, and it was part question, part alarm. "I am protecting our child's future," she answered. "This isn't about vengeance. It's about making sure we both act in the child's best interest, and if our household can't guarantee that, then the court will decide." Chen Hao's answer was a tangle of regret and defense. He had not wanted to be the husband in court. He had preferred quiet kindness and compromises that saved face. The documents forced decisions open. "Can't we?" he began, as if he might propose peace by negotiation. Lin Wei's decision had grown not in a moment, but as a string of exposures. The wet pearls, the whispered videos, the hospital bills, the herb bath that nearly took her life. It had constructed itself into a motion of self-preservation. "No," she said with a calm that surprised even her. "We tried to fix things inside this house. It didn't work." Chen Hao's eyes flashed with something like sorrow. He kissed his child on a forehead that smelled of new shampoo and hospital linen, and then he left the room before a conversation could become a blow. The matriarch watched him go with the peculiar contempt of someone who believes that anyone who yields to a woman is a man in decline. Gu stood nearby as witnesses to these exchanges, his presence a steady counterpoint to the family's storms. He did not speak for Lin Wei. He did not insist. He simply was there, and that steadiness made a kind of statement on its own. When Lin Wei signed the custody petition, he offered to help pay the legal retainer and to coordinate with Attorney Zhang's office. The assistance felt necessary and careful, not ostentatious. That night, after the household had settled into the brittle quiet of people who will not reconcile, Lin Wei sat by the crib and watched her child sleep. The house felt like a stage whose set had been rearranged. She placed a small toy in the infant's hand, a soft rabbit that Gu had brought from a boutique he liked. The rabbit was ridiculous and perfect, and the child clutched it as if recognizing a friend. Lin Wei did not shout. She did not dramatize. She had decided with a woman's surgical patience to use the system as a way to claim back what had been denied. Her divorce petition would start a process, a messy, public, legal choreography that would unmask the matriarch's calculations and Su Qing's whispers. It would not be an instant panacea. But for the first time since the pearls had been found in the trash, she felt the clean edge of agency. Outside, the neighborhood's nightlights hummed. Voices of observers, of relatives gossiping at a respectful distance, filtered through the windows. The next steps were many and slow. The paternity test's return, mediation hearings, the judge's eventual decision. None of those things promised easy healing. But Lin Wei had crossed a threshold. She had taken steps that would reframe the narrative from humiliation to evidence, from rumor to legal fact. She slept that night in a house that had not quite forgiven her for wanting more than what the matriarch permitted. But she slept with the baby under her arm and with the knowledge that she was no longer invisible. The world that had misread her would now have to handle documents, testimonies, and the unglamorous language of courts. It would be awkward for them, more awkward than gossip. If this story is resonating with you, like and subscribe to follow the full journey. There's more coming. In the weeks that followed, Lin Wei moved with the slow, relentless momentum of someone rebuilding a life. The paternity test sample sat in a sealed envelope. Attorney Zhang ran interviews with witnesses. Gu's interventions extended beyond the hospital. He recommended a specialist for the child. He coordinated with Lin Wei's physician to ensure follow-up visits would be unobstructed by the family's whims, and he quietly reached out to his network for reliable daycare referrals. His actions accumulated into a quiet argument for why Lin Wei might build a future outside the house that had tried to domesticate her. Chen Hao's existence between loyalty to his mother and his wife began to hollow him. His work, which had once been a modest management role at a distribution company, started to crumble under the family scandal. Small clients began to hesitate. In whispered office corridors, reputations shifted. The matriarch, who had once prided herself on thrift and independence, now found herself forced into public negotiations she had not expected. Her dignity, which she had leveraged to control others, was now a bargaining chip used against her in calls from attorneys. She hated that feeling, and her hatred was visible in the way she snapped at everyday helpers and in the fretting nights when she refused sleep. Suging adapted quickly. Her maneuvers became subtler, aimed at discrediting Lin Wei in manners that would not leave fingerprints. She arranged for friends to describe Lin Wei as anxious and irrational to a local mothers group. She painted Lin Wei's concern for legal recourse as proof of a volatile temperament. People believed the easier story, that a young mother under stress might act irrationally, until the paternity test would arrive and complicate the neatness of rumor. Susing's face in photos was always lit with a smile that did not reach her eyes, and yet her silence carried venom. Lin Wei watched the tactics from a distance of calm. Attorney Zhang advised caution. Speak when necessary in public, but otherwise preserve dignity. They scheduled the test's results to be delivered to the attorney first, not in a scuffle of social media. Part of winning, Zhang said, was refusing to be baited. When the day for the test result finally arrived, Lin Wei sat in Attorney Zhang's parlor-like office with her child wrapped at her breast. The baby's warmth steadied her like an anchor. Gu remained outside in the car, his patience a low hum near the door. Chen Hao had been invited, required to attend, but he called to say he had an unavoidable meeting. Lin Wei's throat tightened at the empty chair, but she did not falter. The law would have to speak where her husband would not. Attorney Zhang opened the envelope carefully. The paper rustled like the wing of a small bird. The lab results were clinical, brief, and incontrovertible. The DNA matched. The child was, medically and undeniably, Chen Hao's. Lin Wei felt a strange rush of vindication and hollowness at the same time. The test would not undo the humiliation. It would only remove the specific smear that Su Qing had used like a wedge. But evidence had power. It cut through rumor the way light cuts through fog. Attorney Zhang smiled in a manner that was not triumphant, but deferential to process. "This will help in the custody petition," she said. "It shows clear paternity, which removes a major smear that could have been used against you. Now we move forward with the custody filing. You will have to prepare for mediation." The word mediation landed like the next leg of a long trip. Lin Wei imagined a room full of measured faces, of voices that pretended to be neutral while they weighed family hierarchies. She imagined the matriarch seated primly, Su Qing at her side, Chen Hao crumbling between them. The paternity result was a necessary instrument, but the road to actual custody decisions would be paved with social pressure, bargaining, and the slow bureaucratic march. She signed documents that gave Attorney Zhang permission to file for both the divorce and custody petition immediately. The envelope she had once handed to Chen Hao had become an instrument of legal motion. She felt a strange, fierce serenity, like a woman closing a door and keeping the key. At home that night, the house hummed in its complicated veins. The matriarch retreated to the study and called relatives to marshal sympathy. Su Qing tightened her smile. Chen Hao wandered the rooms like a shadow that could not choose doorways. He texted Lin Wei short, awkward messages that read like apologies and pleas that never quite found the right form. He called once and asked, voice thin, "Can't we at least try to work this out?" Lin Wei's answer came not from bitterness but from memory. The herb steam, the trash pearls, the way she had been repeatedly rendered less than herself. "We tried," she told him. "This is my step now." The house's dynamic shifted. Where once minor humiliations had been swallowed like pills, now there was an audible friction. Calls from Attorney Zhang, demand for mediation dates, the matriarch's furious calculation about the family's appearance. For Lin Wei, the paternity result had not been the end of humiliation. It had been an instrument to reclaim dignity. It had forced the family to meet facts. But legal machinery grinds slowly. The mediation date could be set weeks out. Lin Wei needed time to prepare. She needed to construct a life that would not be easily erased if the courtroom favored the matriarch's public campaigns. Gu suggested temporary solutions. A modest apartment not far from the city hospital where follow-ups were scheduled, a nanny recommended by a professional service he trusted, and a liaison who would field calls from the matriarch so Lin Wei could preserve her energy. When Chen Hao failed to show at the attorney's scheduled mediation pre-meet, The matriarch insisted he had work that clashed, as a further demonstration of his being a man torn between obligations. The mediation calendar filled like a ledger being balanced. Dates, rooms, names of counsel. The mediator's secretary called twice, then left a printed reminder taped to the matriarch's study door. Yet when the day arrived for the pre-mediation meeting, intended to set the tone for a civilized negotiation, Chen Hao did not come. He had said he would. He had promised his presence as a sign of possible reconciliation. Instead, he texted that an important client meeting conflicted and that he'd send someone in his place. The matriarch received the news the way a general receives bad intelligence. Her jaw clenched, and she arranged a face of measured offense. He must show respect for the family first, she told the relatives she summoned. If he misses this, it proves where his loyalties are. Su Qing's lips curved with a practiced sympathy that read like a cape draped over a bone. To the household, Chen Hao's absence was proof of weakness. To Lin Wei, it was additional evidence that her husband's presence could not be counted on when stakes were highest. The mediator's office hummed with neutral patience, the sort of place that tries to squeeze human drama into forms and clocks. And Attorney Zhang used the empty seat to explain the next steps in precise, unemotional terms. We'll request an early date for mediation, and I'll submit all evidence to the mediator beforehand, she said. You should prepare a concise parenting plan and any medical or financial documentation. The goal is to secure primary custody and reasonable visitation. We will ask for mandatory parenting classes and supervision terms if there are concerns about exposure to the household's coercive behavior. Lin Wei listened. The words had the sort of bureaucratic mercy that could be trusted, a map instead of a sermon. She left the office feeling both lighter and more exposed, as if someone had turned up a light in a dim attic where dust motes still rearranged themselves into shapes of old shames. In the days that followed, Su Qing accelerated her quiet campaign. She sent out carefully worded messages to relatives and neighborhood groups, suggesting that Lin Wei's legal moves were overblown, that divorce would fracture a family and harm the child. She posted photos of herself with the matriarch at tea houses, tagging the household as unified and serene in an attempt to reclaim the social narrative. But her moves were not purely social theater. She went further. A neighbor who had once shared a lift with Su Qing mentioned an awkward lunch where Su Qing had admitted she had to do something because of the family's fragile reputation. That neighbor approached Attorney Zhang with a note of guilt. The revelation didn't exonerate Su Qing without question, but it added to the array of small details that, when collected, suggested pattern rather than accident. Chen Hao's work situation unraveled in ways that felt both sudden and inevitable. The distribution company where he had held a middling managerial role began to lose clients after the videos and rumors spread into business circles. Local suppliers who once courted Chen Hao's accounts called and requested paperwork that reflected a more conservative, stable leadership than the one the scandal now suggested. Meetings he had been expected to attend were rescheduled or canceled. An important contract was lost because a client did not want public scrutiny on a partner associated with domestic turbulence. When he returned home one evening after being called into a terse meeting, his resignation was already a rumor that had metastasized into fact. The matriarch's contempt had a new margin of taste. She treated him like an unpaid bill. You should have kept house and kept your work separate, she said. This is the result of letting public opinion in. Chen Hao's ache was not only at work. He found he had fewer allies. Colleagues avoided eye contact. Friends offered platitudes instead of help. He walked the neighborhood and felt the changed shapes of doorways, the soft glance of people who measured him now as a risk. It was possible to be diminished by public opinion, and Chen Hao discovered how easily a man could be flattened by the very silence he had used to preserve harmony. All of this affected the tone of mediation when it finally came. The room where they gathered smelled faintly of lemon sanitizer and cheap coffee. A circular table sat in the middle, like an island of bureaucracy. The mediator, a woman with a face that suggested she had heard every marriage story under the sun, greeted each party with even-handed gestures that were meant to reassure and to indicate neutrality. Representatives sat in neat rows, and Attorney Zhang placed a small, efficient dossier in front of her. Medical reports, the paternity test, transcripts of recorded conversations, and the neighbor's written statements about the necklace incident. Opposite, The matriarch arrived with a small retinue and a local family attorney whose lines of argument were familiar. Tradition matters, family unity is paramount, and outside interference is disruptive. Su Qing sat close to the matriarch, her perfume like a thin line of smoke, smiling in the way that practiced people do when they are on script. Chen Hao sat under the matriarch's gaze with the blankness of someone who has been handed a script and cannot improvise beyond it. The mediator opened the floor with an invitation. We are here to discuss the custody arrangement, the safety of the child, and what is in the child's best interest. I ask everyone to focus on the child. Evidence will be considered, and if there are allegations of coercion or medical endangerment, those will be examined seriously. Attorney Zhang's opening statement was simple and steady. Ms. Lin Wei is seeking primary custody of her child and sole legal authority to make medical decisions. We are not pursuing punitive measures against the family. We are asking for necessary safeguards for the well-being of the child. We have brought medical documentation and witness testimony that indicate coercive medical practices and public social campaigns intended to undermine Ms. Lin Wei's parental standing. We ask for a parenting plan that secures the child's immediate safety and for child support to cover ongoing medical and childcare expenses. Then, Attorney Zhang placed a tablet on the table and navigated to a sequence of short clips, neighbor footage, a nurse's recorded statement given under oath to the attorney, and messages showing the matriarch's insistence on the herbal bath. The neighbor, aiming for truth, had recorded more than just the necklace discovery. She had caught Su Qing at the trash, a frame where the hand lingered a fraction longer than should have been necessary. The room was not surprised by evidence that matched gossip. The mediator took notes with the professional detachment of someone who knew how quickly private minutes become public truths. The matriarch's attorney tried to diffuse the clips with rhetorical shrugging. Household disputes happen. Cultural practices are sometimes misunderstood by outsiders, he said. He attempted to relativize the herbal bath, calling it tradition and not coercion. He questioned the neighbor's motives, suggested the recordings were selectively edited, and argued that the family's interest in economizing did not equate to endangerment. Then Attorney Zhang asked for the paternity test to be officially entered into the record. It was a clinical, administrative move that had the effect of clearing one particular smear, the rumor that the child might not be Chen Hao's. The matriarch bristled, as if her worst fear was not that her son loved outside the bounds of the family, but that the family's narrative might be unraveled by cold facts. The room shifted. Evidence, for all their rhetorical strategies, has a way of making certain arguments obsolete. At that point, a new figure stood in the doorway, and the atmosphere changed. Gu Yanqing entered with the quiet confidence of someone used to resolving friction behind the scenes. He had not planned to take the podium today, but when the mediator asked whether there were any witnesses for the petitioner, Attorney Zhang caught her eye and indicated that Gu had been a vital support and had relevant testimony regarding the medical hardships and the family's attempts to control access to care. Gu rose and spoke with the same clear, unassuming tone he'd used at the hospital. He recounted, without melodrama, the logistical assistance he'd provided, addressing the immediate medical bills, arranging nursing care, and organizing follow-up appointments. He explained how the matriarch had attempted to influence hospital policies on visitation and discharge, and how Su Qing's presence had often coincided with unusual requests to the hospital staff. He spoke of the sleeping hours he'd spent on a plastic chair, watching the baby breathe and the monitors beep. A friend's vigilance, nothing more. The matriarch's attorney tried to undermine him by implying the testimony was colored by gratitude, a wealthy man paying his debts with public statements. He asked bluntly, "Mr. Gu, are you seeking influence in this family? What is your relationship to Ms. Lin Wei? Are you making these statements to gain favor?" Gu's answer was simple and precise. "I was a childhood friend of Ms. Lin Wei's. When she was in need, I helped. I have no desire to control this family. I want a child to be raised in safety. I have resources and connections. I offered them so Ms. Lin Wei could focus on recovery and parenting, not on bargaining for basic care." Then, because the attorney had raised the question of Gu's standing, and because credibility matters in a room of neutral professionals, Gu gave his title without drama. "I am the president of Gu Group. I do not give that as a threat. I give it as context. I have resources that ensure the child's health and stability. I gave them as a friend. I would be willing to provide an affidavit confirming that any financial assistance I provide is to enable parental care, not to influence custody decisions. I will not use corporate influence to pressure this family. The revelation acted like a sudden light. It explained why the hospital had accepted the private suite, why a health liaison had expedited paperwork, and why there had been a solid substitute to mitigate the family's attempts to separate mother and child. The mediator made a quiet note and asked if any counsel wished to cross-examine. The matriarch's attorney tried to frame Gu as an outsider, attempting to buy influence. But the neighbor's videos, the nurse's testimony, and the hospital's records formed a ring of corroboration that neutralized much of the rhetoric. The evidence was not a single, perfect blow. It was a layered accumulation that bulleted into a convincing pattern. When the matriarch tried to accuse Gu of orchestrating an international smear, he allowed the claim to fall. Instead, he offered clarity, that his aid had been to ensure the child's safety and the mother's recovery, and that he would sign a statement to that effect for the court and for the mediator. He did not gloat. He did not flaunt money. His presence was, in the end, another neutralizing force that made the matriarch's proud economizing look petty in a room concerned with a child's welfare. Chen Hao was called to speak. He pivoted between contrition and defensiveness in a manner that left the mediator searching for a stable center. He admitted his fear of dissension in the household, confessed to feeling paralyzed when his mother's authority collided with his compassion for his wife, and apologized generally for the things that had been done. He did not confess to any malicious planning on his part, nor could the evidence show that he had actively plotted to undermine Lin Wei. What the record displayed instead was a man habituated to avoid confrontation, a man who would step back when others demanded the stage. The mediator listened, and then asked the crucial question. Given the evidence that Ms. Lin Wei experienced coercive medical practices and public campaigns that risked both her and the child's health, and given that Chen Hao has been reluctant to challenge family authority in these circumstances, what arrangements can protect the child's immediate well-being while preserving the parents' relationship in a safe way? Attorney Zhang proposed primary custody for Lin Wei with defined visitation rights for Chen Hao, supervised at first if the family could not provide witnesses to a safe environment. She asked for medical decision-making to rest with Lin Wei to avoid a replay of the herbal bath episode. She requested child support for medical follow-ups and a parenting class schedule for Chen Hao to establish a record of commitment to change. Lin Wei herself, when asked what she wanted, spoke without rancor. I want our child to be safe. I want to co-parent if Chen Hao can stop being pulled into control by his mother and can show he can put our child's interest first. If the family is prepared to demonstrate that they will respect boundaries, I will consider gradual supervised contact. But I cannot risk the child's health. The matriarch's attorney balked at sole medical authority, suggesting that family involvement is essential in cultural upbringing, and that Lin Wei's refusal to accept the matriarch's guidance was disrespectful. The matriarch herself, in a moment that revealed more about her fear than her pride, accused Lin Wei of being ungrateful and of attempting to sever the family's lineage. That accusation opened a fissure. The mediator asked the matriarch, gently but firmly, whether she would accept a supervised visitation schedule and acknowledge the possibility that some practices might be harmful and therefore off-limits. There was a long silence. For the matriarch, admitting that some traditions might endanger a child was more painful than any court verdict. It meant re-evaluating the scaffolding that had maintained her control. She refused. Her refusal crystallized the mediator's assessment. Family cooperation could not be relied upon to protect the child in the short term. The mediation concluded with a provisional agreement: primary custody and sole medical decision-making to Lin Wei, supervised visitation for Chen Hao to begin after 6 weeks contingent on his participation in a parenting program that included education about modern postnatal care and boundaries. Child support to cover medical and childcare expenses was ordered pending a final hearing. The matriarch did not sign with warmth. She adhered to the agreement with the curly edge of someone who had been forced into a contract she disliked. Su Qing left the room with the smile of a strategist masking a private fear that had not been fully disproved. The mediation result was not a complete legal decree. It was a negotiation with the force of an agreement and the possibility of judicial endorsement. But for Lin Wei, it mattered. The house that had been a theater of humiliations would no longer hold sole de facto power over the child's health. The hospital records and the mediator's recommendations gave her the authority to make medical calls. That authority would be the buffer between superstition and science, between gossip and parental responsibility. After the mediation, life settled into a new, anxious rhythm. Lin Wei moved to the small apartment Gu had helped secure, a modest two-bedroom unit with a balcony that let in city air instead of curtains of family faces. It was not a grand escape, nor did she want it to be. It was merely a space where she could nurse uninterrupted, keep the baby's receipts without them being judged as extravagance, and sleep without the pressure of someone checking to see if she'd been contrite enough. Gu's presence was steady, but unobtrusive. A message in the morning asking if she needed anything, a drop-off of groceries, the occasional presence at pediatric appointments. He deferred to her as the child's mother, never dominating, always asking what she wanted. Chen Hao's attempts to meet requirements were halting. He attended the parenting classes with the awkwardness of a man learning a language he had not used before. Terms like informed consent and boundary setting felt foreign. He sought to prove he cared by showing up to supervised visits and by bringing small gifts for his child. At times his visits were tender, at times they were tentative. The fear of the matriarch's retribution shadowed him. His repeated text messages to Lin Wei were careful, then aimless, full of apology and request for intimacy that she now understood would only entangle him again. Susan, thwarted in her immediate attempts to displace Lin Wei, turned to more subtle campaigns. She began insinuating to neighborhood groups that Lin Wei was trying to cut the family out for personal gain, posting carefully curated images of charity events where the matriarch appeared regal and benevolent. But with the mediation result on record, and the paternity test sealing the child's parentage, most neutral observers began to see the conflict as less about lineage and more about safety. Chen Hao's fall at work continued. The company's leadership, wary of scandal, suggested he take unpaid leave to attend to personal matters. A rumor solidified into a layoff. When he lost his job, the matriarch's judgment was swift and cold. You should have chosen the family. Instead of sympathy, his downfall provoked whispers. Had his weakness in domestic affairs endangered his ability to manage business? The shame wrapped around him like a cold garment. He was, to all appearances, a man losing footing. At one point, destitute and desperate for solace, he went to the matriarch and implored for help with basic expenses. She allowed him to live in a small annex off the kitchen, but the terms were humiliating. He paid them in small acts of servitude. The matriarch watched him with a species of satisfaction that comes from seeing control reaffirmed. Lin Wei saw something more painful. The man she had married diminished into a person who chose the familiar prison rather than the uncertain road to independence. Gu's involvement shifted over months from pragmatic assistance to consistent partnership, but never in a way that forced or coerced. He respected Lin Wei's pace. He would attend a pediatric appointment, then let her speak first to the doctor. He would arrange for a discreet legal courier to deliver paperwork to Attorney Zhang, and then vanish, his generosity practiced as a form of respect, rather than an obligation. They spent time together in the evenings, talking quietly as the baby slept. About small things at first, like childhood memories and trivial recipes, then about larger matters such as parenting philosophies, trust, and their own vulnerabilities. Gu was not a savior. He was someone who, in the absence of drama, offered consistency. And for Lin Wei, that slowly became the ground upon which she considered a life with another person. The months that followed the mediation saw incremental legal progress. Attorney Zhang filed the custody agreement with the court and sought judicial approval of the mediated provisions. The court reviewed medical evidence, the neighbor's testimony, and the mediation's recommendation, then ordered that custody remain with Lin Wei until a final hearing. The judge's ruling was pragmatic and narrowly tailored. It prioritized the child's immediate safety and recognized the serious nature of the medical incident. Chen Hao's visitation rights were confirmed under a structured plan. The judge also reprimanded both parties gently for allowing their disputes to become public spectacle. One evening, after a long day at the child's clinic, Gu and Lin Wei sat on the small balcony of the apartment, watching the city lights. The child slept inside, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender, the small comforts Gu had insisted on bringing. They spoke of the months past, how every small kindness had made the fight possible, how Attorney Zhang's competence had been a lifeline, and how Lin Wei's resolve had never been theatrical, but rather stubborn in its quiet. "Why stay?" Lin Wei asked suddenly, not about Gu but about herself. Why she had kept pursuing dignity when the cost was so high. Gu looked at her with the same steadiness that had become his hallmark. "Because you were never meant to be owned," he said simply. "Because someone had to make sure the child would be safe. Because I remember a laugh I loved as a kid, and it seems a small cruelty for the world to make that laugh disappear." His words did not erase the past. They were not grand vows. They were an acknowledgement. Lin Wei considered how much trust required echoes, of past knowledge, of the person who had been there in the darkest hour, without expecting a transactional loyalty in return. Slowly, without scenes of sudden rapture, affection formed, an affection based on respect, reliability, and mutual recognition. When the divorce papers moved towards finalization, Chen Hao oscillated between wanting to repair things and being paralyzed by what repair meant. He had tried to apologize and to promise change, but promises without evidence are thin. The matriarch refused to cede social standing. She denounced the separation with a coldness that meant there would be no family reconciliation that included Lin Wei on equal terms. At a hearing where the terms of property division and custody were to be confirmed, the matriarch's attorney made a last-ditch appeal for the family's honor, suggesting financial settlements be considered as a way to keep the matter private. Lin Wei shook her head. She did not want money as pardon. She wanted custody and the ability to care for her child free from interference. She wanted the right to make medical choices. She wanted the noise of approval replaced by the quiet of safety. The court granted the divorce and the custody provisions as mediated. The divorce decree ended the legal tie between Lin Wei and Chen Hao, and the custody order reaffirmed her primary parental role with medical decision-making authority, while preserving Chen Hao's structured visitation rights and requirement to complete parenting education. No extravagant alimony package was attached. Lin Wei's refusal of large financial settlements made the judge ask if she understood the decision. She did, and she accepted it. Her acceptance was not mortification. It was a choice to not commodify her child's safety. The news sent ripples through both households. The matriarch responded with bitter silence. Chen Hao, suddenly unmoored, had to find a new place to live and a new way to support himself. His joblessness and residue of public shame left him with fewer resources than before. In a town that measures success by appearances and networks, he found doors closed. The matriarch's reputation did not crack easily. She remained a force in her social circles. But her appetite for control was tempered by the legal recognition that she could not unilaterally dictate the child's care. For Lin Wei, the finalization of the divorce brought a deep, careful peace. The violent edges of humiliation dulled into memory. She spent her days building a life that fit the quieter metrics of safety and love. Pediatric checkups, careful budgeting, naps in the sunlight, and visits from Gu, who in small gestures made the world feel less precarious. She had not asked to be rescued. She had asked to be allowed the ordinary dignity of choosing the terms of her own life. A slow romance unfolded, not with the torrid speed of melodrama, but with the steady pacing of two people who recognized compatible moral compass and emotional availability. Gu did not propose in drama. He proposed in patient conversation. One evening, after a year of shared routines and mutual support, he brought Lin Wei to a small, quiet garden that belonged to a friend's restaurant. The garden was lit with lanterns, but nothing more ornate than that. He sat with her on a bench and placed a small plain ring into her palm, a ring without ostentation. "Would you marry me?" he asked, his voice a careful thing. Lin Wei looked at him, at the ring, at the years behind them, the emergency room, the courtroom, the countless small acts that had built mutual trust. She thought of the child asleep at home, of the small rabbit toy that held the child's fist, and of the life she had been piecing together. "I will marry you," she said, and the words came from a place of deliberate choosing rather than rescue. "But I am asking for partnership, for equal voice, For someone who will stand with me without making me owe him for my life. Gu smiled, relieved and honest. I promise partnership. I will be beside you. Not as the one who bought safety, but as a companion who will help carry it. Their wedding was not a spectacle. It was an intimate ceremony in a small chapel rented by a friend, attended by a few trusted relatives, and the attorney who had guided them through legal thickets. Gu's family allowed themselves a discreet presence. The matriarch certainly did not attend. Chen Hao was not invited. The vows they exchanged were simple and resonant, promises of respect, of equal decisions, and of protecting the child as if he were both of them. When Lin Wei walked down the aisle, she did so with both a gravity and a lightness that came from having earned the pace of her own life. After the wedding, life settled into a new normal. Gu and Lin Wei merged small household routines and managed the child's needs together. Gu continued to keep his involvement measured. He offered support without commanding the narrative. Friends said the marriage was sensible and quietly beautiful. Lin Wei's circle was smaller, but its quality felt more than sufficient. Chen Hao watched the wedding through a cracked window of the life he'd been reduced to. He had not been present for the ceremony. He had not been invited, and perhaps it would have been a mistake to attend. Instead, he found himself trying to reconstruct what he had lost. He accepted a job in a different city, humble and anonymous compared to his previous role. He read parenting books, attended support groups and counseling offered by the courts, and tried to reforge an identity that had not been dependent on his mother's commands. The steps were real, but progress was jagged. There were times he felt hopeful, and times when he wanted to disappear. In the months after the wedding, Chen Hao's life contracted, and then began the slow, awkward expansion that comes with learning to stand alone. He lived in a small rented room, and took modest shifts at a logistics company far from the clients he once fretted over. The matriarch's calls grew infrequent and clipped. She resented him for the spectacle and for the loss of control, and she learned how to orient her outrage into an austerity that preserved face without inviting scandal. One spring afternoon, when Lin Wei and Gu took the child to a small park, Chen Hao happened to be there on his weekend visitation. The meeting was supervised as the court had required, and the exchange was careful. Lin Wei observed from a distance as Chen Hao played awkwardly at tossing a soft, safe ball. He laughed, and then looked up, meeting Gu's eyes for a brief, tentative moment that felt less like competition and more like an exchange between two men who knew the stakes of their presence. There was no drama, only the slow choreography of co-parenting in motion. But the final tableau that completed the arc of humiliation and reversal happened later, after the divorce had been finalized, and Lin Wei's life had settled into a modest happiness. Gu had organized a small reception to celebrate their marriage. It was a gathering of close friends in a light-filled restaurant. The matriarch had been given the chance to attend, to offer the appearance of civility. She declined. Susan had sent a florist under the guise of goodwill, and the arrangement had arrived to the muted pleasure of the attendees. Outside the restaurant, under the kind glare of an ordinary afternoon, Chen Hao found himself standing alone. Word of the reception must have reached him through mutual acquaintances. He had tried to rebuild himself, but there are certain losses that press on the soul. Seeing Lin Wei married, sealed in a covenant of respect with a man who had been a steadfast friend, brought a feeling to him that had nothing to do with legal obligations or civic morality. It was the private, raw sting of regret, the recognition that he had failed when a friend had not. He saw them as they stepped out into the light, Lin Wei in a dress that was elegant in its simplicity, and Gu who held her hand like a fellow traveler. The small child rode on Gu's hip, jabbering in the way infants do when everything is interesting. Chen Hao felt his knees go loose. He felt the world tilt under a burden he had not been able to lift. He fell to one knee then, not theatrically for the crowd, but in a posture that communicated his unvarnished need. It was a gentleman's implore, a mortal mistake made vivid in the street. People paused. Some recognized him, some did not. The matriarch, if she had seen, would have considered the scene scandalous. Su Qing, who arrived seconds later breathless with curiosity, gasped. Chen Hao's face was wet. His voice shook. "Wei," he said, addressing the woman who had once been his wife. "I was wrong. Please, take me back. I'll change. I'll do anything." The plea was stripped of all bravado. It was not a performance but a collapse, a man suddenly asking for his life to be remade on terms he had never before chosen. He knelt not because it was a romantic gesture, but because he had run out of the other options a man like him had always relied on: avoidance, appeasement, silent compromises. Lin Wei felt the world tighten into a single sharp sound. The sound of someone finally seeing how a person had failed. She looked at Chen Hao, the man she had once loved, who had shown love in small morsels, but who had failed to confront the force that had threatened their family. She thought of nights in a hospital where she had nearly died, of pills and herbs, and a stream of people who had watched her like a subject under a lens. She thought of the years it had taken to assemble evidence, to file papers, to learn the legal language of protection. She thought of the long months when the world watched as if entertainment were layered over human cost. Her gaze did not waver with vindictiveness. It held instead the quiet of one who had finally been allowed to act on behalf of someone else. The child. She could feel the child's small heartbeat against her leg. The years of humiliation had taught her something important, that mercy must not come at the expense of safety, and that compassion cannot be a mask for enabling harm. She stepped forward a measured pace and crouched to be eye level with Chen Hao, not to coddle but to make the equality of the moment apparent. "Chen Hao," she said, her voice steady, "I know you are sorry. I know you regret what happened. But we are not the same people who can return to what we had. I forgave cruelty in the name of family once because I did not know how else to survive. Now I know." Chen Hao's hands trembled as he reached for an apology that felt too small to cover the distance. "Please," he said again. "I'll do anything. I'll be a good father." "You can be a father, and you should be," Lin Wei interrupted, but gently. "You must be present, consistent, and willing to be accountable. You must do the hard work of learning to stand away from your mother's control. If you want forgiveness, work for it. Show it in steady actions, not in moments like this." She paused. "But I will not take you back into my life as my husband. Our marriage has ended. I have built a life in which my child is safe. You have a place in our child's life as a father, but it is not a place that entitles you to ask for me back." Chen Hao's posture crumpled further. He looked up at her, as if she had delivered both balm and sentence. The reality of his loss landed in him with a fitful sound. He had begged for something he no longer deserved. Gu stood slightly behind Lin Wei, hands folded, not intervening. His presence was gentle but firm, the symbol of a new guard. He did not gloat. He did not seize the moment to humiliate. He simply met Chen Hao's gaze and, in a tone as level as Lin Wei's, said, "Being a father is a lifetime commitment, Mr. Chen. Take it seriously." Chen Hao stayed on his knees a long moment, not performing for the crowd but showing the private ruin of a man unmoored. Then slowly, he rose. He did not speak again. Without dramatics, he turned and walked away, a man with fewer possessions than before, but with the first rumor of integrity, the willingness to accept consequences and to try, in small, imperfect ways, to rebuild. Lin Wei watched him disappear into the city crowd, and then turned back to the child asleep against her chest. The decision she had made years before, to take control of her life, to press evidence into the hands of the law, to refuse empty settlements, had brought her to this quiet, affirmed place. She had chosen custody, dignity, and respect. She had remarried not out of desperation but out of choice. She had watched the man who had once been her husband fall to his knees and plead, and had chosen with quiet clarity to refuse a return to the old life. Later that evening, as the guests drifted back into the warmth of the restaurant and the city lights settled into ordinary constellations, Gu squeezed her hand. "You did the right thing," he said simply. Lin Wei smiled, not with triumph but with the calm satisfaction of someone who had been through the long, hard work of choosing a life. "We did," she corrected. "We did it together, for our child." If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to follow more stories where dignity and justice prevail.